Hello friends, welcome back to Dental Exam Guide, and today's topic is anatomic landmarks on tooth surface. This is an important topic for you, and these are the previously asked short note from this topic. That is short note on ridges, oblique ridge, cusp of CARABELLI, defined ridge and groove with examples, defined ridge, groove, lobes, and give examples for each. Anatomic landmarks on the tooth surface can be broadly classified into two: elevations on the tooth surface and depressions on the tooth surface. And the elevations on the tooth surface include cusp, tubercle, cingulum, lobes and mamelons, and ridge. And ridge is an important short note question. There are different types of ridges: incisal ridge, marginal ridge, mesial and distal cusp ridge, buccal and lingual cusp ridge, triangular ridge, oblique ridge, and transverse ridge. Depressions on the tooth surface include fossa, grooves, and pit. Three types of fossae are seen: lingual fossa, which is seen only in the anterior teeth, then central fossa and triangular fossa, which are seen only on posterior teeth. And there are two types of grooves: developmental grooves and supplemental grooves. Let's see in detail about the elevations on tooth surface. First one is cusp. A cusp is an elevation or mound on the crown portion of a tooth, making up a divisional part of the occlusal surface. Cusps are present in the posterior teeth and canine. Canine teeth have a single cusp and they are often called as cuspids. Premolars generally have two cusps, with an exception of mandibular second premolar, which frequently has three cusps, and premolars are therefore also called as bicuspids. Maxillary and mandibular first molars have 5 cusps, while the other molars generally have 4 cusps. And a supplemental cusp seen in the maxillary first molar is called as cusp of CARABELLI or tubercle of CARABELLI. And this supplemental cusp is seen palatal to the mesiopalatal cusp, which is the largest of the well-developed cusp. And usually a developmental groove is found, leaving a record of cusp development unless it has been erased by frictional wear. And this fifth cusp or a developmental trace at its usual site serve to identify the maxillary first molar. Of course, cusp of CARABELLI is not present in every tooth, but a specimen showing no trace of this characteristic is rare. And this supplemental cusp, it can take the form of a well-developed fifth cusp, or it can grade down to a series of grooves, depressions, or pits on the mesial portion of the lingual or palatal surface. And this morphologic trait has been used to distinguish populations. If you have a look at the shape of a cusp, you can see each cusp is a Gothic pyramid with the 4 sides formed by 4 ridges that run down from the cusp tip. And these 4 ridges are mesial cusp ridge, distal cusp ridge, buccal or lingual cusp ridge, and triangular ridge of the cusp. And on either side of triangular ridge, there are 2 cusp slopes. And in canine tooth, there is a labial ridge, which is analogous of buccal ridge of posterior teeth, and a lingual ridge, which is analogous to the triangular ridge of posterior teeth. And ridge is any linear elevation on the surface of a tooth and is named according to its location. First one is buccal cusp ridge. Buccal cusp ridge is a ridge on the buccal surface of a tooth that runs from the tip of the buccal cusp towards the cervical line. Buccal cusp ridge is seen in the posterior teeth, but in case of canine, there is a ridge called labial ridge, which is analogous to the buccal cusp ridge of posterior teeth. Next is lingual cusp ridge. Lingual cusp ridge is a ridge on the lingual surface of lingual cusp of premolars and molars. And we know in canine there is no lingual cusp, but there is a lingual ridge, and it runs on the lingual surface, dividing the lingual fossa into two small fossae. And every cusp has a mesial and distal cusp slope. This mesial and distal cusp slope of the cusp is known as mesial and distal cusp ridges. So each cusp has a mesial and distal cusp ridges on either side of its tip. Next one is triangular ridge. Triangular ridges, they descend from the tip of cusp of the molars and premolars towards the central part of occlusal surface. And slope of each side of the ridge are inclined to resemble two sides of a triangle. That is why they are called as triangular ridges. They are named after the cusp to which they belong. When a buccal and lingual triangular ridge join, they form a transverse ridge. A transverse ridge is a union of two triangular ridges transversely crossing the surface of a posterior tooth. That means the transverse ridge crosses the occlusal surface buccolingually. And marginal ridges, they forms the mesial and distal margin of occlusal surface of premolars and molars, and mesial and distal margin of lingual surface of incisors and canines. Next one is oblique ridge. Oblique ridge is a ridge obliquely crossing the occlusal surface of maxillary molars and is formed by the union of triangular ridge of distobuccal cusp and the distal cusp ridge of mesiolingual cusp. And oblique ridge is most prominent on permanent maxillary first molars. It may be present on maxillary permanent second and third molars also. It is also present in deciduous maxillary second molar. Next ridge is cervical ridge. It is a ridge that runs mesiodistally on cervical third of buccal surface of the crown. And cervical ridge is a characteristic feature of all the primary teeth. It is most prominent on maxillary and mandibular first molar. And in permanent dentition, cervical ridge is seen only in molar teeth. Another elevator structure on surface of tooth is tubercle. Tubercle is a smaller elevation on some portion of a crown produced by extra formation of enamel. In lateral incisor, it can be seen as a prominence equal to a small cusp at the cingulum. So the difference from cusp is that tubercle is formed only of enamel. CARABELLI's tubercle or cusp of CARABELLI is a small additional cusp on the mesiopalatal line angle of maxillary first molar. It may be unilateral or bilateral with a marked deviation in size. And it was first described in 1842 by a Hungarian dentist, George CARABELLI. It is most common in Europeans and it is a heritable feature. It is actually a tubercle as it may be made only of enamel and may not contain dentin, but never has a root underneath. But if the cusp is large, approaching the size of a regular cusp, then it will typically be formed of dentin and enamel. And a tooth with tubercle of CARABELLI or cusp of CARABELLI is more susceptible to dental caries. In some cases, an accessory cusp is seen occasionally in mandibular permanent or deciduous molars called protostylid. And another tubercle called sucker candle's tubercle is a small cervical tubercle at the mesiobuccal crown margin of maxillary and mandibular deciduous first molars. And it is one of the key identifying feature of this tooth. MCQs related to this topic and the remaining part of this topic will be discussed in the next video.